So good morning, everyone, and welcome to another version of our virtual RV rally. We've got a great program today. Some of us have talked about transmission repairs and our needs, but how would you like to be sitting in Mexico with the transmission going on your Roadtrek? And that's exactly what happened to our friends Mark and Nat this morning, who are going to share with us their experiences of Mexican technical repairs and their transmission problems that they had. And I think those of us on the forums have seen Slow Sally's trips to Guatemala and Mexico and Central America. And that could be a good topic for another session, actually. But today they're going to share with us their experience this past winter in Mexico getting their transmission redone. And I should say that Nat and Mark live in Canada, just in Quebec, a little bit north of Ottawa, Ontario. So thanks so much, folks, for taking the time to prepare this presentation and share your experiences with us. So we'll turn it over to you. You can decide if you want to do questions at the end or as we discuss. It's a fairly informal group, and we'll go from there.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Doug, for allowing us this forum to tell our story. We tell the story a lot, and it's in one day people say that it'll be something that will be positive, and we're trying to turn this into a positive experience by telling the story. So thanks, Doug. I'll start with letting Natalie introduce who we are.
Yeah, so, well, Doug, I think you actually did a pretty good job. So yeah, we're a couple of Canadians. We travel with our dog, Walter, and try to go all throughout North and Central America. So we've been down as far as Guatemala, did intend to get down to El Salvador the year the pandemic hit. And luckily we weren't in El Salvador when that happened. So we still want to get there, but yeah, we were lucky we weren't there during the pandemic. So we're usually on the road for 4 to 6 months a year. That's kind of our goal. And when we're not traveling, we're living here in Quebec, Canada.
And we travel to avoid
yes.
the cold, yes. The snow, and dreariness. So
yeah, good point. And so Mark's retired, which is what allows us to travel. I work part-time as an urban planner on contract. So I try to take contract work when we're home, sort of spring, summer, fall, and during the winter, I take as little work as possible. And Walter is unemployed. We love.
Well, I think he's actually in charge of security. I always like to tell people that. So.
But he does a very poor job of it. So overly friendly security guard. Yeah, we love sharing our adventures online as well. So we do have a blog. You guys have potentially seen it, but we'll be sure to post just a link on the Roadtrek site afterwards with that link. And we'll also try to put this presentation, I know Doug's going to record it and put it up. We'll also try to put it up on our website, just so the PowerPoint's available on our Slow Sally website page. And so yeah, we thought we'd just run through this quick. So in terms of the presentation, we're going to try to just tell our story in our 10 or 15 minutes, sort of, you know, what happened and how we got it fixed. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about what it cost, lessons learned, and then from there we'll go into Q&A, and we're going to try to leave a lot of time for Q&A because I think a lot of the valuable discussion is going to come out of that. So I'll hand this back over to Mark for the story.
Okay, so title, What Happened? It's basically everybody's worst nightmare, and effectively, you know, to be broken down in the middle of the desert without cell signal with a transmission in a foreign country, you know, it's hard to get worse than that. We were heading basically north, basically going along our route back home, and if you can see the map, that's where basically where the little arrow is where we were in the bigger picture. And we had gone all the way down to the bottom, and we were basically starting our way back home, basically. And on the highway between two cities, Mexican cities, we just kind of lost power. We weren't like the RPM just started to increase, but we were slowing down. Basically, the transmission was disengaging. from the drive system. So, you know, we pulled off in the middle of the desert, no cell signal, and, you know, started, okay, what are we gonna do here? So got under the van, opened the hood, took a look. There's transmission oil all under the pan, all under the undercarriage of the van. You know, certainly it was a transmission issue for sure. Couldn't see any brakes. I tightened the oil pan bolts, you know, because, you know, oil is coming out of somewhere and I couldn't figure out where. And it's like, that's where all the oil was. So I did that and added some fluid because we were low, and effectively figured, hey, we're good to go. We've solved this. So as we're moving forward, it goes about maybe 30 meters, give or take. And then it does the same thing, and then it comes to a dead stop. And it's like, oh, we have a big problem here. So we were sitting on the side of the road for an hour, baking in the hot sun, the odd car going by. And, you know, I tried to get a cell signal on the top of a mountain, maybe half a kilometer away. And eventually a trucker stopped by and said, hey, do you need any help? And we're kind of like, you know, do we say yes or no? We didn't know what to do. And effectively, you know, this is our chance. So we got towed strapped. And if you see in the photo, you'll see it's just a strap attached to the back of his truck, you know, attached to the frame of our van. And he towed us like that for an hour. And we had the four ways on and my foot ready on the brake every time for a sustained hour all the way back to Loreto where we started. And he left us basically on the side of the road there. And we were quite glad to be in signal range and right next to the town. So basically that was, you know, like a safe place. You know, we had, you know, resources available to us, and, you know, we called it a day and we slept overnight there.
Yeah. So we were sleeping overnight, basically, you know, on the side of the highway beside a motel. And keep in mind, so this was the Thursday before Good Friday in the evening. So we were, I mean, Easter is a huge deal in Latin America, and so we were really nervous too. Like, how long are we going to be stuck with everything closed? So we were, you know, the next morning we were definitely like, okay, we got to do something about this before everything shuts down for the weekend.
Yeah. So we you know, we talked to the truck driver who brought us around a few places, talked to some mechanics, and effectively we kept on hearing the same guy. Basically, there was only one guy who dealt with transmissions in Loreto. And it's like, well, that's going to be the guy. It's like, we're here and that's the guy. It's not like there's a lot of choice. And we heard a lot of nice things about how nice he was and blah, blah, blah. And so we called him up, and, you know, he basically came to our rescue, you know, showed up, and we got another tow strap to his garage, basically. He effectively said, oh, yeah, I see what the problem is. And it's like, it's going to have to be a rebuild or a replacement. And he suggested a rebuild. And because we didn't, you know, you're at the mercy with a used unit out in Mexico. And he says, oh, I've done those a lot. You know, I've been doing this for 30 years and not a problem. And should be 5 to 7 days, give or take. And in fact, he allowed us to camp in his garage, you know, while it was happening, so we wouldn't have to incur, you know, daily costs at the RV park. So it all sounded good. He said it would cost about $1,000 US, and it was like, hey, you know, this is the best thing that's ever happened to us. It would cost us, you know, quite a few times more in the US or Canada. So, you know, we thought we were golden at that point. So, you know, but 5 to 7 days turned into 12 days, and problems with parts, problems with extra charges, you know, the confidence level kept falling, and effectively we started to like think that maybe this isn't going to be the best thing for us. So, you know, but finally the day arrived 12 days later. We're talking almost 2 weeks living in a garage here, and effectively we went for the test drive. It was put on, it looked all good, and we're driving, and it's like, oh, it feels good. And then all of a sudden it misshifts, and it's like, oh, that's not normal. And it's like, oh, maybe it's just, you know, figuring itself out. And then it misshifts again, and it's like, oh, that's not right. And then all of a sudden there's a bit of a rattling sound, and then Natalie said, I think I smell something burning. And it's like, okay, that's really not good, right? That's our brand new transmission. Our rebuilt transmission is doing all the things that it shouldn't be doing. So effectively, the mechanic said, okay, let me take over. This is probably okay. So he took over, and all of a sudden the same thing happened as the first time. It just lost power, pulled to the side of the road. He looked at a few things and says, oh, we'll need to get back to the garage. So, we limped our way back, having to stop every so often because it would stall, and pulled the pan out, and it was full of metal, kind of similar to the what happened before. And effectively we were at a point where, like, oh, what do we do now? And the mechanic said, well, it's like, I think we need a new torque converter, and I think we need new parts, and effectively, I'm not sure, we might have to get parts in another city, blah, blah, blah. And he looked very distraught and unconfident. And that's where we basically said, okay, you did your best, and we're gonna go now, and we're gonna start over, basically.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, before we did sort of abandon our attempts at Nanol's garage, Mark went in a cab and drove around to some of the other mechanics in town, just to kind of see what they had to say about Nano and his abilities. And basically, after talking to a few people, we kind of got the message that, yeah, Nano's a nice guy, but like, maybe not quite up to the task of rebuilding the transmission you guys have. I think maybe he was better for small jobs, not sure. But anyways, once we heard that, we were like, yeah, okay, this is not a good place. So we cut our losses, and basically left Nano's garage, and of course left all our money there as well, because we were sort of paying. I mean, these guys don't have a lot of money. We were paying as we went for his labor and for the parts. So that was, that was money we were not going to be getting back. So we just had to sort of say, okay, that's, sunk cost, and move on.
A valiant attempt that didn't work
out. That's right. So he did get it working well enough that we could drive a little bit slowly around town. And so we were able to get to the RV park, which was just basically around the corner from the garage.
About a kilometer. So.
Yeah, about a kilometer away. So we kind of drove really slowly, got into the RV park, and that's the picture you see on the bottom there. So we said, okay, we're in the RV park. We've got the van again. We spent a day just like cleaning out the inside of the van, showering, kind of getting sorted back out, and then decided, okay, we've got to come up with a new plan. And so as you'll see in the photo, we spent a lot of time in coffee shops, on the internet, trying to figure out what to do. And so we did find this Facebook forum called, I think it was Talk Baja. And it was like a forum for mostly expats, but it was all things Baja. So there was like mechanics, there were businessmen, there were expats, there were people who do shipping, there were insurance agents. And so we just kind of wrote like, oh my gosh, help, we're stranded in Loreto, and our transmission's broken down. And it was amazing the number of people who contacted us with all sorts of ideas and recommendations. And even, the insurance agent, thankfully, reminded us, because we weren't even thinking about this, that we had Mexican auto insurance. That's a legal requirement in Mexico. So that meant some of our towing or shipping would be covered, and some rental car fees. So once we learned that, we were like, okay, right. So we had all these options being thrown at us.
Yeah, we were almost a little inundated.
Yeah, almost too many options.
And we spent often entire mornings, day after day, sifting through all of them, trying to figure out what was the best option.
That's right.
Always formulating a better and a better plan, basically.
Yeah, and so finally there was a shipping agent out of California with a company called MexPat, and they basically take care of shipping anything, cars, housewares, whatever, up and down the Baja Peninsula. And so he got in touch with us and said, hey, look, I've got an idea. We could ship you in a transport truck back up to Tijuana. He offered to help get us towed across the border, because you can't just ship right across the border. You have to have a special tow truck that has that cross-border ability. And he also had a transmission mechanic in San Diego that he had used personally for like 20 years, had a lot of confidence in, and he was going to help us coordinate all this. And we just thought, you know what, at this point, I think at this point we'd been in total in Loreto for like 3 weeks. And we were just like, okay, this sounds good. It gets us north, it gets us out of here. And it sounds like this guy knows what he's doing. So we decided to go with that. So he was sort of coordinating the shipping side, and then we were having to coordinate like rental car, motels, and all that kind of thing, which was difficult because they couldn't really give us a solid date of when we would be leaving. So we would like set up, you know, reserve a motel, reserve a rental car, then, oh no, it's not happening that day, cancel everything, and then, you know, start up for another day. So that was a lot of logistics. But yeah, eventually it was, you know, we had a plan coming together. It took us about 5 or 6 days between sort of trying to start this new plan and then having the shipping ready to go.
Yeah, so the shipping, you know, it's not like in Canada or the US. You know, so Mexpat and other shipping companies move a lot of stuff all the way to the south of the Baja, but nothing comes back. So we were kind of fortunate that, you know, you have all these trucks coming back empty. So, you know, they're looking always, you know, scraping for anything to send back to lower their costs. So that worked out well, and effectively, you know, they have these makeshift docks, which is just a hole in the ground that a transport truck backs in, and we can load things like a van or anything. So it's a little sketchy for sure. But so, yeah, so basically after 5 days, we got the call. That meant we were on logistics for the rental car. We had to get our camping gear. We had to limp our way back again to the loading dock, which was, you know, not that far from where we were left off originally from the first tow strap from our trucker friend. So, you know, we got there, and it's like, it's always a waiting game. Mexico time is like waiting. They tell you in the morning, but they show up at 4, you know, so that's kind of always the deal. So effectively it showed up, you know, there was a big gap between the loading dock and the truck. So they stuffed some wood in between, and, you know, they wanted me to drive it in. So I'm not driving that in there. So they said, oh yeah, I can do it. So they drove over the gap, and it went in fine. I was kind of worried, but it went in fine. And there was just enough room for some stuff and the van. And you know, once the doors were closed, certainly it felt like there was a big, you know, pressure left off, because, you know, now we had a car, the van was going to be heading north, and we were going to be heading north. So effectively, we did 2 nights of tent camping along the way, because it is 600 miles to Tijuana. It's not short. And effectively, when we got to Tijuana, that was another thing. It's like, we always thought Tijuana was like this, you know, broken down city of death. You know, it is known as the murder capital city of the world. And it was actually kind of nice, surprisingly. It was modern, and you would never know so many people get killed there. And I think effectively, unless if you're part of a cartel, the drug cartel, it's a dangerous place. But as tourists, I think you have really nothing to worry about. We walked around the city, and it was just a vibrant, regular city. We would never have known that so much death was around. So that was a surprise. So we spent the night in a hotel motel there, and we figured we had another day, but they called the next morning and said, yeah, it's at the dock in Tijuana. So Slow Sally got there a day early. So now we were like rushing to get everything ready, get ourselves packed. You know, our rental car was full of dog hair because we didn't tell them we had a dog, otherwise they would have not let us have the car. So I had to duct tape the entire car so that not one piece of fur was left. So, you know, all that stuff we had to Uber with the rental car to the rental car place, and we had to Uber out of there to the dock, and then we had to get the tow truck guy over. Again, it was lots of logistics, but the tow truck guy was a nice guy. He showed up fairly quickly, and you know, we basically got the van on the tow truck, and basically 2.5 hours later, we only traveled like 10 miles, but 2.5 hours later, we crossed the border, and we, you know, basically got ourselves to the transmission place and dropped it there. And it's like, holy moly, that's the most difficult part we've managed anyway. So things got better from that point on. And I'll let Natalie do the next slide.
Sure, yeah. So basically, we dropped it at Medina Transmission. It's actually in Chula Vista, but right beside San Diego. And dropping it there was, yeah, that was just a huge relief. It felt like kind of it was out of our hands, which felt good in a way. Just to know that, you know, our part was done and it was in someone else's hands. And so we went to the nearest Motel 6, which I have to say for dog-friendly accommodations was one of the best. Like, it's not the greatest motel, but they have no extra charge for pets. And so that was our go-to.
Basic but good.
Basic but good and dog-friendly. So the guy at Medina's transmission said, okay, you know, 5 days, I'll have this done. And so it was going to be ready by the end of the week. And we thought, yeah, right.
Yeah, we've heard that before.
We'll see. And so, you know, we decided, okay, we're going to take advantage of this. We'd never been to San Diego. So we spent about 5 days just touring around, like playing tours. And we were always sort of on call. We never knew, like, you know, when we were going to be called to say the van's ready. But we did a bunch of sightseeing. We loved San Diego. Actually, we would go back.
We were very impressed with San Diego.
Very impressed.
We loved it. Actually.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. And we thought, you know, had it not been for having to spend our time in motels and eat out so much, I mean, the costs were going up quickly. But it had not been for that, we would have loved to spend more time there. So that was actually a really nice, it felt like we were on vacation again for the first time in a long time. So that was really good. And so, but to our surprise, in 5 days at the end of the week, they called and said, okay, your van's ready. The transmission's good. It's ready to go. And they also installed a big new transmission cooler, which they said for a van like ours, especially traveling in hot environments and mountainous terrain, they said having a big transmission cooler is really important. So they,
yeah. And what is funny is that, you know, I went to the trouble of trying to get the biggest transmission cooler here in Canada. And they kind of like, you think that's a big transmission cooler? Yeah. It's like, maybe in Canada, but out here where it's really, really hot, it's like you need something bigger, which was actually, you know, I was very much more, I had more confidence after you said something like that. It's like, oh, you know, local guy knows what he's doing here. So we felt quite good about that.
Yeah, and so we picked it up. I mean, I have to say we were like skeptical after everything we'd been through. I feel like we just did not have a lot of confidence that this was going to work out for us. But we picked it up. She was running good when we picked her up, and we thought, okay, it's, you know, we got more than a few blocks, which was better than the last time. So we thought, okay, this is looking good. Took her to hose her down. I mean, the van was so dirty after months of Baja dirt and sitting in garages. So hosed her down. And I think it was actually someone on the Roadtrek forum who said, don't leave right away, drive around the city for at least a day or a couple of days, just to make sure that should anything go wrong, you're close to the mechanic. So we did that. We ran errands all day and drove around town, and it was working well. So we thought, okay, fingers crossed, we think it's going to be good. And we headed up into the mountains, sort of, you know, away from the ocean, heading back east towards home. And got to our first campsite. It was up in the hills, a couple of hours of driving. And so you can bet we toasted with beers that night at the campsite that we were actually on the road and in the van. And so it worked out for us. And then I have to say, like, I think it's about 5,000 miles to get home from there. And we did everything that the mechanic had told us was bad for the transmission. We drove through really hot deserts, through, you know, southern Utah and northern Arizona. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is a bad idea. And then we were going through the mountains in Colorado. So we really put her to the test, not really on purpose, just we just did. And it worked out. We got home. I think the whole way home, every noise we heard, we were like, is that the transmission? But, you know, she's in our driveway, and, you know, to this moment is still functioning properly. So
I still think we suffer from PTSD for transmissions, because it's like every time it shifts, did it shift at the right time? Was that a good shift? It's like we're so paranoid now. But, you know, it worked flawlessly the entire way. So, you know, hopefully we'll recover.
Yeah. Yeah, our confidence isn't 100% back.
But it's building.
Yeah. It's building. Okay, so I'm gonna hand this over to Mark. We're not gonna go through this item by item, but just to give you a summary of the costs.
Yeah, and we have it in USD and in Canadian for both sides. And effectively, you know, there was some costs associated to the first build. The second build was normal cost, I think, and it actually was probably quite good for what we got. Then there was all the other associated costs, you know, the hotels, the Uber fees, the rental car, and, you know, all those things added up. And, you know, thankfully, you know, we ended up, you know, finally back home getting a couple of $1,000s US from our insurances, which, you know, really helped tremendously, because that you know, we were really adding up a lot of money there. And effectively, you know, it was worth mentioning that, you know, we only paid $11,500 for the van, you know, 5 years ago, and, you know, we're looking at, you know, at some point, you know, pushing $10,000 worth of expenses for this. And, you know, we had this, you know, discussion about maybe it's cheaper just to push the van into the ocean and, you know, hitchhike our way back home and start over, because, you know, it would be more cost effective. So at what point do we stop spending? Because, you know, for a while we didn't know when it was going to end, because we just kept on paying and paying and not getting anywhere. It felt like a vicious circle.
Yeah, and I think one thing, and we can talk about it more, I think, in the Q&A, because it's an interesting discussion, but this does sort of come back to the discussion about preemptive repairs as well. And, you know, you see where, had we been preemptive, as much as, you know, maybe we would have replaced it a little earlier than it needed to be, you know, we would have been paying something more like the $3,000 US for the repair versus the $7,000 that it ended up costing because of all of the, you know, external costs associated with it. So, and then we do want to leave lots of time for the Q&A. So I think we'll go through the lessons learned pretty quickly, and then we can jump into questions and answers. So so our lessons learned from this, and there's probably more than what you see here, but these are some of the highlights, were have a contingency fund and a high level plan in place for breakdowns. So I think it's always a good idea just to have it in the back of your mind, like if you were to break down in a certain area, you know, what are some steps that you would take, and also just having enough money on the side so that, you know, should something happen, that you're able to fund the repair as opposed to having to abandon the van.
And the other one is install a big transmission cooler. So, you know, what kills transmissions is heat, and effectively anything to cool down the transmission is the key for longevity and reliability. And, you know, as much as, you know, we went to the trouble of trying to get a big cooler in Canada, you know, bigger is better, effectively.
Yeah, and another one is being preemptive with maintenance. And so, I mean, we generally do always bring our van into mechanics before a big trip, have them look it over. Certainly there was no signs that our transmission was gonna go. That being said, we did kind of know in the back of our minds that a lot of Roadtrek transmissions go around the 200,000 mile mark, or 330,000 kilometers. Our van was at that
exactly
number of kilometers, pretty much exactly. And you know, we had sort of talked earlier, oh, should we replace it? And oh, we'll wait a bit. But I think in hindsight, on a big international trip like that, when you're going to be in places that are not necessarily well supported, it is something worth considering if you're around that mileage.
Yeah, and if you know, if you never travel very far, and chances are you're going to break down near your house, it's not an issue. You could probably be best and more efficient just to run it until it breaks and you're still in your own neighborhood. But if you're far away, where, you know, it's going to be expensive and you're going to incur secondary costs, then certainly you've got to consider it more. So the other one is purchase good quality Mexican auto insurance, and that includes, you know, roadside assistance, AAA, CAA, and, you know, this year was the first time we got AAA, and we've used it, and it was we were kind of lucky. And the Mexican insurance too, we were lucky that it happened to be one of the better ones, just by luck, because we normally don't pay too much attention to that. We just get it, and we got it and let us in. And you know, we learned later that, oh, you got one of the better ones, and it was it paid off really well, because they were good with us in terms of the claims.
Mm-hmm. So another one is don't rush into a repair, and make sure to consider all your options before proceeding. And so that we did some, you know, research and talking around before we brought it to Nanos, but I think we were rushing, especially with the Easter weekend. And that's something that I think under different circumstances, had we taken a little more time, we probably would have opted not to bring it to Nanos. And then we would have been able to start with a different option from the beginning, which would have saved us time and money. So
yeah. So the other lessons learned is that it certainly helps to know the local language. So we're no way fluent in Spanish, but we've been in these countries long enough that we've picked up a lot, enough to order a latte and do groceries and the usual stuff. It certainly gets more complicated when you're talking about technical things about your van. But nevertheless, any little bit helps, even if it's a small amount, and they recognize that, and they're more likely to help you when you're chatting with them. So I would say that it's, no matter, and this applies to any country you're in, I always try and learn some of the language.
Yeah, another thing we learned was getting good parts in Mexico, especially in Baja, can be difficult. They just don't have as good access to good parts. So even if you find a good mechanic, sometimes just getting the good parts can be difficult, time consuming. In our case, Nano had no confidence, I don't think, in his part suppliers. And we were basically on the hook, like if a part came and wasn't good, that was sort of our problem to deal with. So not like back of what we're used to in Canada and US, where they take some responsibility for the quality of the parts that they bring in. So, and
in fact, what we often do for preemptive is, like, when we go to Mexico, we often bring, like, I had the shocks installed in Mexico. I brought the shocks from Canada. Brought our own parts basically, and they install it, and you're only paying for labor. So, and I'll do this one. Good communication. So, every year we're trying to always up our communications, cell phone providers and trying to get, and it's always different every year. And effectively, your ability to access the internet and make calls is very important no matter where you are. And effectively, it's in this case made a big difference. And in the past, we had more limited approaches where we'd use only Wi-Fi from coffee shops and restaurants, and we've been upping that game, and we really were happy that we could still be better, but effectively having the best telecommunication abilities plays a big role in managing an emergency like transmission failure.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that we did so in 5 years of owning the van. Prior to this year, Sally had never broken down on us. We had a huge amount of confidence. But this year she did break down 3 times. So the transmission was the third. 2 smaller breakdowns happened on our way down south. And in both cases, we were in the US, we had a good cell phone plan. We were able to call AAA, everything was really smooth. And so we were really thankful that we had our cell phone plans working, because otherwise that could have been pretty complicated as well. Okay, so now we've got Q&A.
Wow, what an impressive presentation. Just a great presentation, and how you've structured it and organized it was quite impressive. Thank you so much. I'm not sure how much time you would have spent on it, but I'm sure you spent a lot. So yeah, very impressive. So yeah, let's see who has some questions. Just come on and ask the questions. If you push your space bar, that'll toggle your microphone on usually, and we'll go from there. I think you did mention a little bit, there's a question in the chat box about how do you know when your transmission is going to fail in advance so you can do the preemptive repair. You did kind of address that a little bit, but would you have seen anything obvious the week before that might have tipped you off?
Yeah, so transmissions fail in a variety of ways, and there are, often there are signs like misshifting and odd noises and losing your overdrive, that burning smell, and often the oil will start being discolored, right? And if you drop the pan, you'll start seeing a lot of metal at the bottom. So those are the kind of things that can give you a warning, but it's not always necessarily the case. And in our instance, there was no warning whatsoever. Everything was working wonderfully, and until it right in the middle of the worst place possible in the Baja. And effectively, so, maybe you're lucky, maybe you're not. So, there are no certainties in terms of how it's going to fail, whether it will give you a warning or not. So, for us, we had just actually had a discussion with a friend maybe a week or two ago earlier. And, because our transmission was getting, a little long in the tooth, we asked him, and he was a bit of a car guy, and said, what would you do? It's like, would you change the transmission even though it's running fine? Do you fix something that ain't broke? That kind of thing. And effectively, he couldn't answer. He says, that's a real tough one, because your transmission could last 400,000 or 250 to 300,000 miles. Nobody really knows. Certainly it's getting older, but there are many that last that long, and there are many that burn out much earlier. So if you took that approach, you'd be changing a lot of parts perhaps too early, and that's kind of expensive. So it is a bit of a conundrum, and effectively we at that point, we were talking more and more about it, and it's like, what, I think next year we should really look into it. But that never happened, because it burnt out before we got next year.
Good, yeah. Well, and then I know you see some people on the forums talking about, well, of course, take an extra fan belt. That's quite custom, but then you got people who want to take an extra rebuilt alternator, then they want to take a water pump, then they want to take a fuel pump, and where does it stop and start? And I'm kind of like you, Mark. As long as it's not making funny noises and it seems to be working, I don't fix it if it ain't broke. But some others want that sense of security, and it reduces their stress not having to worry about it. So I think each of us have our own way of dealing with that, based on our knowledge and comfort level with our mechanical knowledge and abilities may depend on which way we go in that regard. Any other questions, folks?
I don't have a question, but I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. I did follow it online as you were posting, and my heart went out to you too as you were trying to figure out how to get home and how to get it fixed. And I'm gonna need to sign off, but thank you for presenting, and Doug, thanks for having this forum.
Well, good to see you, Jane, and take care.
You
And
too.
we'll see you on the road somewhere, maybe down the way.
Sounds good.
I had a question about your analysis of your original plan to repair versus install a rebuilt one. Did you go through that decision process, and what motivated you to fix versus have a rebuilt one shipped in?
Well, that's always a very complicated decision. And it is based on where you are and how much money you're willing to spend. Seeing that we were in Mexico, certainly anything that involved a lot of labor was to our advantage. We considered used, which would have been the easiest and fastest, but you're at the mercy of how good is that used part coming out of Mexico. And I did tour 2 or 3 different junkyards looking for our exact transmission and couldn't find one locally, not in Loreto anyway. And again, we were still going like, do we really want someone else's used transmission? How long will it last? We have no clue, how reliable it's going to be. And so we kind of wrote that one off as, last resort kind of thing. But since there wasn't any around locally, we chose not to go that route. That probably would have cost us $300-400 to swap one out. So the next one was the rebuild. Because the labor is cheap, you're looking at a total of about $1,000 US, and that appealed to us, and that would give us all the new parts in theory that would allow us to be confident in its reliability for years to come. And those are, they purchase kits, rebuild kits and different parts, and but you're at the mercy of who's actually going to do it. And as we learned, you know, you always need the right guy. And
Yes.
effectively, we didn't have the right guy.
And the quality of the parts.
And
as
the quality
well
of the parts,
was
right.
Yeah.
So effectively, you know, that was a concern, but at the time, with what we knew at the time, it made the most sense. Now, we could have sent it out, shipped our existing transmission out to the US, or we could have bought another rebuilt one from the US and have it shipped in. And, you know, those have all cost and time requirements, pros and cons with that as well. I generally tend to like to keep the core transmission that I have and have it rebuilt, so I know that it's the same one, and I know it better. You know, getting somebody else's rebuilt transmission from the US still kind of irks me a bit.
It'd also be the most expensive.
And it would
Yeah, it
be
would have been the most
more expensive.
option.
And the other thing too is that, you know, if we're going to go to that level, we could get a remanufactured one if we could find one, which is even a higher standard than rebuilding, which basically they take a transmission and they bring it back to original specs, assuming that that company is doing it the right way. And they're much more expensive, obviously. And that would be the, you know, I guess the gold standard if you had deep pockets. But, you know, you still run the risk of, you know, having it shipped over and the mechanic puts it on and goes, that's the wrong one. And it's like, you know, even trying to identify the one we had, you know, I think ours is a 46, what is it? RH, which means it's a hydraulic system as opposed to electronic control. You know, getting those little intricacies in terms of its identification right is tricky, you know, and effectively, you know, a lot of those transmissions were undersized. So, you know, what they usually do is put a heavy duty torque converter in them to make them better. But would you be getting that from a remanufactured one? I don't know. So there's a lot of questions that come out of that. But certainly in theory, that is the highest level. You know, then it's the, you know, rebuilt, and, you know, then under that is, you know, the used version.
Yeah, so it depends a lot on how much money you have to spend, how much time you have, how much confidence you have in the local mechanics. I think if we were stuck in the exact same position again, knowing what we know now, we would have explored shipping our transmission up to San Diego without the van, just the transmission, and having it rebuilt and sent back. Because I think if we'd done that initially, the amount of time required would have been reasonable. We could have stayed in our van in the RV park and enjoyed Loreto, not living out of the mechanic's garage. And then we could have, you know, Nano probably would have been up to the job of just reinstalling the rebuilt transmission when it came, you know, when it came back down. And there was actually a guy on the Talk Baja forum who'd sort of offered to help coordinate that for us. So he said, you know, he could coordinate a shipper. You know, he knew some mechanics, you know, we had other mechanics recommended to us in California. So, you know, that probably would have been the best value
if we had
option.
more time.
Yeah, like if we'd done that from the beginning.
Yeah. But, you know, there's still a lot of pros and cons, and how it would have turned out is uncertain because we didn't do it. But, you know, there's a big logistics about, you know, dropping the transmission, you know, having the van move to drop the transmission, find a shipper again, you know, bring the transmission to the shipping area, have it shipped. You know, the border crossing is always you know, an uncertainty because you're importing and exporting a part. And, you know, sometimes they get caught at the border. So there's a lot of, you know, and certainly since we already know a good transmission shop, then it's, you know, hindsight's 2020. It's like we would have just shipped it there, but we didn't know that at the time, right? So where do you ship it, right? Like who's going to rebuild it for you?
But that would come into, I think that, you know, when we were talking about not rushing your initial decision on what to do for a repair, like I think now that we know that those options exist, I think another time we would have probably just spent the whole Easter weekend not doing anything, just doing research, talking to people, figuring out what our options were, you know, getting on some Facebook groups, and deciding from there. Because yeah, we definitely, some of the things we heard about Nano after the fact, we were like, geez, if we talked to some of those people initially, you know,
nice guy,
but
you know, his work is like,
and you know, we always gave him like beer and Cokes and chocolate bars at the end of the day, trying to keep him happy because we were camping in his garage. He was a nice guy, but
He meant well.
How do you go about vetting someone like you kind of know now that you didn't vet him enough, but how does one go about vetting a potential garage or mechanic, or is it just a matter of going around town and talking to people?
yeah, I would say, I mean, in Canada and the US, like Google reviews and that kind of thing is great, but he was not on Google. He wasn't anywhere. A lot of the mechanics weren't on anything there. And so, but there were quite a few different mechanics in town. And there was one mechanic who did not do transmissions, but who had an excellent reputation as being sort of like the best mechanic in Loreto. And we had wanted to chat with him initially, but he was closed. He was very busy. He was closed Good Friday, and we sort of thought, oh, we're not going to get a hold of him. But he was really helpful later on, and just having someone with a good reputation like that. If he'd said, oh no, Nano's great, and maybe we would have even stayed and tried a second round of repairs with Nano, but his sense was basically that yeah, he
didn't want to say anything bad.
He was careful,
but he sort of was very candid and basically saying that there's no one in Loreto that can help you with this.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, read between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you need to, either move your transmission or your van to a bigger city with better people who are, more have certification and who have, like a real, not a backyard setup. Mexico's renowned for backyard setups, and you're right. They can fix all kinds of things out of nothing. And they're very skilled, but transmissions are a level higher. Transmissions, computers, electronics, those kind of things are very more, even if they're old, much more complicated for your basic Mexican who often doesn't have any real education or any formal training. So
just to console you a little bit, there's a guy by the name of Hobotech who has a YouTube channel, and maybe 3-4 years ago, he did one on his transmission replacement, and he was in the U.S., I think maybe California or Arizona, and he elected to do a replacement transmission, which was shipped in. I think they got the wrong transmission, like you alluded to, Mark. Then they replaced it, they got another one, and it was the right transmission, but apparently there were two different size of drive shafts coming out of the transmission that hooked up, and the one that they shipped was the wrong size for what he needed, even though the transmission was right. The transmission rebuilding company from up in, I believe, Minnesota or Wisconsin area, they couldn't believe that this thing wouldn't fit because of all the specifications seemed to match. It ended up they sent two guys down to this transmission shop, and I do believe they came in a van with yet a third transmission, and so they because of course they wanted to troubleshoot this to avoid a future problem, and so they came down. They found out that the shaft was there were two versions of the shaft. They could switch the shaft, and but he was tied up in a hotel for I think at least 2 weeks, but if I recall correctly, the transmission company made it right with him, and they treated him right. They got him going, other than his time and hotel bills. They got it fixed, and they worked with the mechanic at the shop to make it work. So I think even if you're in the U.S. or Canada, you can still run into these similar problems if you're not in a good mechanical environment or in a good shop.
Absolutely. And actually, we have heard before and since our breakdown, lots of issues similar to just what you described, Doug, in US and Canada as well. So that's, all the stuff about, doing your research, that applies in Mexico, but that applies anywhere. And even if you read through Google reviews, like we are reading through some on the different San Diego mechanics, and, mostly positive, but even them had some customers where for whatever reason there were problems, issues with the repair, the transmission repair didn't last. And so they're very complicated repairs. Yeah. You can run into troubles no matter where you are. And, Mexico is just that much tougher because, the mechanics, a lot of them are less specialized. it's harder for them to find parts down there. Yeah, it's just not an easy repair.
And that's why we elected to move the van to San Diego, because, you know, we didn't want to start playing this game where, you know, ship the transmission out, have a rebuilding, comes back and it's wrong, or buy one there, have it shipped and it doesn't fit. Because even one of the converters that he originally brought in, it was the right one, but it was exactly, there was a shaft sizing issue. And it's like, it's supposed to be the right one, but it's a different coupling thingy. And effectively, as much as it was right, it was wrong. So that one was of no value. We had to ship another one in. So more delays. And so from my perspective, if you have the van at the shop in the US, you know, they're going to put it on. They'll know if it fits. They'll, you know, they're responsible for making sure that it drives and that it works.
Yeah.
You know, when we get it back, if we have it sent out and brought back to Mexico, we're on the hook for making sure that it drives and works. And if it doesn't, then what do you do? It's you know, for us, the certainty was worth the extra expense of shipping the whole van out.
There were so many transmission mechanics in San Diego. We figured if it doesn't work out at one, we'll just go the next and the next and the next. Like
push it to the next one.
Yeah,
we're all in the same street.
That was the main issue in Loreto, was that, you know, we tried with the one guy, it didn't work out, and then, you know, and then you're just kind of even if you ship something in, if something doesn't work,
we would have to ship anyway. Like if we moved from Loreto to the next big town, we're still talking, the next biggest town was probably 5 hours away, heading the wrong direction. So we didn't want to go the wrong direction. We're making things worse in a way. So alternatively, we ship north, and if we're shipping north and it's pretty far, it's like we're a step away from Tijuana, and if we're that close, we're a step away from San Diego. So it only makes sense to jump the border.
Yeah, that's good thinking. Good thinking. Anybody else got any last questions before we wind up? The one that I have is from your experience dealing with all these transmission mechanics and what you've learned, would it be wise to take the unit to a transmission shop and have them just do a diagnostics of it? Can they predict what kind of condition it is inside? If they pull the pan, of course, they might see some metal filings or not, or change the fluid in the filters or whatever. Is that a good investment, do you think, or did you pick up any sense of that?
I think generally, and that's kind of, it helps, but it's not necessarily the solution, is that you need to change your oil in your transmission regularly anyway. And we do a fairly decent amount of kilometers. So we do it every other year. So when the pan's down, you look at the magnet, you take a look at the transmission fluid, and those things are indicators for sure. But you know, in a long trip, you know, you may start off fine, but by the time you're on your way back like us, you know, that's when it could still give you problems. But certainly it's worth changing the transmission fluid and taking a look. They can see by the magnet whether something is falling apart, and that certainly helps. And a lot of people don't change their transmission fluid ever. Like in my older cars, I never changed transmission fluid, and I've scrapped them with the original transmission fluid. But you know, on something you're relying, like a Roadtrek, to get you into other countries, you want to have some certainty on that part. So we change the oil in the differential as well on a regular basis. So effectively, you want to be on top of that kind of stuff, because it can go south pretty fast, as we know. Yeah.
Well, and as you said, when you're driving around closer to home, it's not as serious an issue if you break down. But if you're headed out on a longer trip, and especially into a foreign country, that's a whole different scenario that you need to be anticipating. And as Nat said, have a contingency plan and have a fund set aside that you're not stranded somewhere. So, well, thanks again, folks. That's been absolutely a wonderful presentation. Good of you to share your experiences. And once again, I want to compliment you on how you organized your presentation and laid it out very clearly. Well done. And thank you on behalf of all of us here today. And of course, we'll be posting the video for people to see, and we'll share the link with you so you can put it on your network as well. That's great. And maybe you can start thinking about doing one on a travelogue to Mexico and Central America at some point. As time allows, we look forward to having you do that in the future, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, we would absolutely be happy to do another one about that. And I guess related to that, just before we go, one question we've gotten a lot is, will you ever go back to Mexico in your van after this? And the answer is absolutely yes. We love Mexico. We've had very good experience with Mexican mechanics on lots of other repairs.
And just the people in general.
And just the people in general, super kind people, great country. And so certainly hasn't had any effect on us not wanting to go back. It's just, yeah, I think the lessons learned has been great for future travels, but we'll go back for sure.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I have gone to Mexico. Actually, we go to Mexico a lot for volunteer work, humanitarian work through Rotary or UN activities. And so we usually are there at least once a year, sometimes twice. We've driven in Mexico, but we've never taken our road trek. Often our Mexican Rotary friends will loan us a vehicle, and I feel safe driving a vehicle with Mexican plates. And you're not as much a target there as a gringo with Canadian plates. But maybe we'll hook up in Mexico and do a caravan down there sometime in the future. So thanks again, folks. And great to have the turnout today. And we will see you down the road trekking. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.